I am part of the Now is the Time Healthy Transitions Technical Assistance Center. I am the Healthy Transitions Team Lead and also have the privilege of being the Technical Assistance Liaison to 4 Healthy Transition communities. I have provided TA to previous grant programs for this age group, and I've also been a project director for 3 System of Care grants. In this endeavor, Shannon Robshaw from the TA Network and Bree Maselli from Youth Move National are going to be joining Johanna Bergen and I to support the learning community. And with that, I am going to turn this over to you, Johanna.
Excellent. Thanks for the introduction, Gwen. So again, my name is Johanna Bergen, and I am the Executive Director of Youth Move National. And here at Youth Move, we play key roles as youth engagement experts and technical assistance providers for both the Now is the Time TA Center and the TA Network. I'm excited to see both familiar and new names of attendees on today's webinar. So I'm hoping this is not the only time we get to work together in this format moving forward. I am more curious about who you guys are rather than who Glenn and I are, because you are the experts and the important people we want to be able to hear from today. So we're going to do a quick series of polling questions to find out who you are, and we're going to be asking you about the roles that you play in your organization and your organization itself. So Gary, if we can start that first poll. And Gary or Gwen, if I could ask, just in terms of the internet connectivity challenges I'm facing, as you guys see those results coming in, can you prompt it for closing?
Yeah, and I think we can close it. Johanna, our largest group of people are state, tribal, territory, tribal, local mental health agencies. That's above half of our participants. We have another 25% who are other. So if you're an other, could you please type in the chat box what that represents to you? And then the rest are all about 3%, Johanna, of youth organizations, family organizations, and federal agencies.
Excellent.
I think we can go to the next poll, Gary. So here we would like to know about your role. So this is fun. Some of you are still participating. Thank you so much. Johanna, our majority are project directors of SAMHSA grants.
All right.
We do have some youth and young adults or youth support providers and some mental health agency leadership and some technical assistance providers. So we have a good group here. Okay. Can you see the polls at all, Johanna?
Now I can, yes.
Ho-ho!
So,
okay, there you go.
So the top question is asking you to rate the system that you're a part of. And the second question is asking to rate your individual understanding. And both of these questions are asking you to reflect on the system and then your personal understanding of issues that are important to young adults of transition age. And you guys are clocking in so quickly. You're poll experts already. And we have a really broad group of folks. Okay, that's really interesting. So definitely some early and intermediate development for the systems that we are a part of, which is in line with what we were sort of prepared to address in this learning community. And then quite a breadth of your personal experience that you bring to these issues, which sets us up for some really robust peer learning. All right, and Gary, we have one more. Yes, and the final poll question for this section, we are asking for you, again, to rate what stage of implementation best describes where you are in this work. And many of us use a basis of implementation science in our work, and so you may be familiar with the stages. But are you at exploration, installation, initial implementation, or full implementation? And again, we're seeing a broad breadth here as well.
This is going to be a great learning community, Johanna.
Yeah, I'm excited. So, and as Glenna mentioned in the beginning, this is definitely an initial setting the stage event, and we're excited to build in additional components of peer learning within each of the coming series. Okay, great. I think we know a little bit more about who's with us today, and we can move on in our slides.
And Johanna, the slide telling who our hosts were, it seems to be missing. So would you like to go over that before we go?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so this is a very exciting meeting of a partnership for the launch of this series. So we are co-hosted by the Now is the Time Technical Assistance Center, providing system of care to Healthy Transitions and Project Aware grantees, as well as hosted by the Technical Assistance Network and its support of system of care grantees, as well as states and communities working to improve their children's behavioral health systems at large. And our audience today is a mixture of grantee leadership and positions from across both the Healthy Aware and System of Care grantee cohorts. And so we're going to spend just a couple of minutes helping us meet and center ourselves in those roles. On the screen in front of you, you'll see the Systems of Care core values. Systems of care is near and dear to my heart. I like to think about it as a philosophy and a values-based framework to approaching improved innovation in the children's behavioral health system. The core values of system of care include being family-driven and youth-guided, identifying and believing that the strengths and the needs of the child and family determine the supports and services that we design for them. Systems of care is community-based, and systems of care is also culturally and linguistically competent. You'll see by the graphic on the screen that systems of care centers a child, youth, and their family and wraps the services and delivery systems around the needs of those individuals.
So the Healthy Transitions grants, Now is the Time Healthy Transitions, were awarded in 2014. There are currently 15 state and 1 tribe grantees. It's a change initiative serving young adults 16 to 25 and their families. I invite you to look at the activities and the principles. There are 2 key grantee positions, a project director and a youth coordinator, both of whom are full-time, and we'll be telling you more about that. But we want to move on to how this fits together in our learning community. These are different approaches, but they're definitely not a we-they. It's what happens when you move from the child to the adult serving systems. These slides will all be available to you, so we are moving through them very quickly, but I invite you to look at them. And this is a particularly interesting slide to me. So the Healthy Transition and Grant communities are part of what we're calling a policy to practice and practice to policy loop. There are local lab sites who work on the ground with young adults and through lessons learned give advice and guide to policy decisions on the state level. And state partners work closely with local communities to identify policy initiatives that can improve young adult outcomes. In system of care grants with local implementation sites, you know that you have established or are in the process of establishing MOUs with state agencies to build partnership and work in this same practice to policy, policy to practice loop. State system of care grants work with local counties and with regions to implement change activities. We'll be talking a lot about this policy to practice, practice to policy. Johanna, oh, I think this is you, Johanna.
All right, perfect. And some comments that are coming in the chat box. There are communities who are already connecting the approaches we're learning in healthy transitions to that of system of care. And that very practice on the grantee level is one of the things that brought us to launch this learning community and partnership so that we can do that very same thing. So, all right, so we're going to have a series of true or false questions throughout today's time together. Our first true or false question comes to you now. And Gary, is there any way that we can show them just the first one? And if that doesn't work, you can answer them all. We're going to come back to them in a second. But the first true or false question. Okay.
Certainly. So they should only be able to see the one about almost 19 million young adults?
Yes. Okay, perfect. So a true or false question. Almost 19 million young adults have reached out for support via text message during a crisis via the crisis text line. And we'll let your responses come in. Not universal agreement, but many of you, the majority of you, think that this is a true statement. This is a half false statement. So the false part of this statement is the almost. So there's actually been over 29 million text messages exchanged by young adults in crisis around specifically behavioral health concerns, including anxiety, bullying, eating disorders, LGBT issues, self-harm, sexual abuse, in the last 3 years. And if you guys aren't familiar with the crisis text line, they have an open sourced data project that provides aggregate information of what youth and young adults are reaching out for support about. And you can break that down by where you live, by the time of day, or by the issue that you're working on. But what is overwhelmingly important to me as I look at that data is, one, the number of young people who are reaching out in crisis, and that they are showing us their interest in communicating via text message. And so this offers us two important considerations for us to start thinking about as a learning community. One is, how do youth and young adults want to reach out and identify supports and services? And the second is, how many youth and young adults out there are in need of the support that we are building within our communities? All right. I want to take a quick moment and just offer, we would like an ongoing contribution, your thoughts or insights or questions as we're going. I think at this point, and especially for sake of moving through content, that we would invite you to chat some questions or thoughts into the chat box. and we'll monitor those throughout to respond. And we are going to move into some of the content for today, which is really Gwen and I's best thinking on setting the stage for some important issues that we may want to investigate and work on together as a learning community. And so the next slide will help us think about what do we know in transitions, and we'll take you through a series of things that we have learned from our work. And so the first is that this population, the young adults of transition age, have poor outcomes when transitioning into adulthood. And we know that they struggle in a variety of ways that is important to our work and involves many of our systems partners from employment to education. And Gwen, I'll let you go into specifics.
Great. So, as opposed to normally developing peers, and this is one of these things that will not be new news to you, young adults have very poor outcomes in all domains: employment, education, living situation, pregnancy planning, justice systems, and substance abuse. But I think the other thing that is important to think about is that the data also shows that young adults with mental health challenges have the worst outcomes transitioning to adulthood than any other disability group. So poor outcomes compared to normally developing peers, the worst outcomes compared to other disability groups. So now we have another true and false question already for you. It is, the understanding of youth culture is critical to appealing and appropriate approaches to service delivery. So did you all answer that already? Oh, there we go. Okay, when we get to our next discussion time, I'd be curious about the people who answered false to that. We do consider that a true, very critical part of service delivery for this age group. Although the caveat is always very important that understanding of youth culture does not mean that all young adults are alike. So Gary, can we go back to the slides? Thank you. So adding on to the what do we know about young adults transitioning to adulthood, it's a population with poor outcomes, and it's a population in a very unique developmental stage that these are not old children and these are not younger adults as opposed to young adults. So, Johanna.
All right, so really briefly, I wanted to frame us in the experience of what it means to be a youth and young adult. And one of the perspectives that I spend a lot of time working with communities is helping us think about as supportive adults and allies, how do we view this population in our work with them? So really briefly, I'm going to run you through the work of Daniel Siegel, who wrote the book Brainstorm. The following content is definitely about the typical experience of an adolescent, so a young adult that we all know in our community. As a society, we look at this age range of these later teen years and early 20s, and we think about them as novelty-seeking young adults, right? And very quickly we hear the word risk-taking. They're impulsive. They just do things. They don't think about it. And there's a reframe that is offered within Brainstorm to this common understanding that there's a really great upside to being a young person who is willing to seek out novelty. that these young people are then able to be open, accepting of change, that young people live passionately, and they tend to design and create their own way of doing things. And I think it can be helpful for us to move from a judgment of risk-taking to a strengths-based openness to their sense of adventure and their sense of new ways of approaching life. The second thing that we hear people say commonly about the adolescent years is that it's all about social relationships. It's all about who your friends are and who you're dating and who you're with. The downside is that we see poor outcomes when young adults lose their connection to others. They become very isolated, and with that isolation there becomes the increase of risky behavior. The upside is the ultimate potential of this hunger and desire for social engagement, that the need and the drive to build relationships can build lasting connections that will support young adults through the rest of their lives. And if someone could switch to the next slide for me, thank you. The third common phrase that we hear is, oh, they're so emotional, right? The roller coaster. And I think that in my mind this is often connected to that risk-taking, very intensely responding to the feeling of the moment. And I'd ask for us to think about, again, the reframe offered within Brainstorm, is that if we live our lives with this emotional intensity, we also live with an energy that infuses all of our work, and a zest for being alive. And that reframe from a roller coaster emotional to one of positive energy and interest in the future is a reframe provided within Brainstorm. And then the fourth common thing that we hear when we talk about adolescents is about their creativity, right? That this is really a time when we figure out who we are and how do we relate and what do we relate to the rest of the world with. The downside that is quickly connected to this is the vulnerability that it creates in the lives of youth and young adults. But the upside is that while we're in this creative exploration time, we are free of the stuck in a rut mentality that is also often connected to adulthood. And I have found after working on issues that affect transition-age youth for the last several years that it was incredibly refreshing to be able to take some common factors about adolescence that we know and reframe them. And so this is a series of slides for you to think about, to be hopefully provocative for us as we think about how we're going to work and spend our time together. Now, these sort of common realities of adolescence are for a typical adolescent. And the young people that we are working to improve the supports and systems for every day are also grappling with mental health challenges and systemic involvement, oftentimes in multiple systems, that adds additional layers and complexities to an already challenging life time. And so that's really where we want to move forward with the rest of today's discussion is how do we best support the young people within our communities.
Thank you, Johanna. And I'm going to echo Johanna's request that you be using the chat box for discussion areas since we're a little behind on content. I see that both Heidi and Danielle brought up stable, permanent supportive housing options, which are really, really important parts of appealing approaches to service for this youth group. And in fact, thank you for giving me a segue. We're going to be talking about that later on. But please continue to use the chat box. So Not new news to anyone else. This is by way of Dr. Mary Ann Davis that the individuals develop, or as individuals make the change from childhood to adulthood, there are 3 interconnected transitions going on. There are, okay, Gary, there we go. The individual transitions, family developmental transitions, and institutional transitions. And you are all very much experts on this, but as you know, that the individual developmental transitions changes accumulate over time, as do functional capacities gradually change over time, and it does not happen on a certain birth date. There's no magic age that we wake up and say we are an adult. Similarly, families also transition in what they're doing, and they very much have changing roles from a couple to parents to families. There's the changing roles of different members of the family as there are aging parents, retirements, young adults move out, young adults move in. So there are some very critical family developmental tasks that happen to conserve the family unit. And then, of course, there are also institutional transitions, programs, policies, and eligibility change. The problem is that very often these are based on rigid age criteria, rather than individual need, and have little to do with gradual developmental changes. And you will see on your slide that that is someone in a rowboat drowning in paperwork. So our family members and young adults on the call certainly know what that is like. So where to start? Lessons learned are that better outcomes for young adults are sustainable and replicable when there are both practice and policy changes. This is where the term policy to practice, practice to policy loop comes from. And throughout the learning community, we'll be exploring specific issues within each of these pieces, and you're going to get to tell us where you would like to start on that later on. Johanna.
And our third polling question, young adults experience better outcomes transitioning to adulthood when services are specific and unique to the children's system or the adult system. I'm just giving a couple of minutes for folks to log in. You guys have excellent participation rates in polls.
They do. I noticed that we had 32 people in the first 2 polls. So we need a few more of you to keep up that record.
All right, and we don't have quite as much agreement in your answers to this question.
Interesting.
Glenn, I feel like that is kudos to our wordsmithing of complicated polling questions. So this polling question is actually false. Young adults experience better outcomes transitioning when services are designed to be appealing and appropriate to them as an individual, and responding to the needs of an individual youth and their family, rather than building systems or services that work within one of our systemic silos. In this polling question, we're calling out a topic that I believe we'll have robust discussion on, which is how do we support young adults who are transitioning if we have a hat in the children's behavioral health system, or if we have a role in an organization that provides adult consumer behavioral health services.
Thank you all for participating in our questions.
And we're going to talk about, just briefly, about how service delivery is and needs to be different for young adults. And Gwen, we're going to lean heavily into your many years of experience working with this age population.
Thank you, Johanna. So those of you who know me well, you know that I'm passionate about this and could spend several webinars talking about this. But Johanna convinced me to just highlight a couple of these where what some of our lessons learned have been. But again, as you are able to download the slides and look at these, I think this is something very important for community discussion. Engagement enrollment for this age population is very different. Many times we find young adults are system wary and system weary, so that's a critical thing. Danielle and Heidi, you already recognize for us that young adults want, like all of us, a safe place to live and a job or some kind of income to support that. And so that clinical services may not be on top of their list. And it's critical for us to be aware of those partners of employment and housing, and to be very proactive about working at that. The other thing is typical clinical settings may not work. They don't want to come, young adults don't, as all of us, into a waiting room where that might be stigmatizing or have playthings for preschoolers. Young adults in a planning process, a year-long planning process I was involved in, decided what they were looking for was a super Walmart location. Open 24/7, someone greets you, you can get most everything you want, from food to clothing to home furnishings. And so that's very much a challenge to all of us to create. It's a policy and a practice challenge to create inviting places for young adults to come. And many of you on the phone have been involved with or are planning the sort of drop-in center that would be appealing for that. And then the other thing we'll talk a lot about is in this learning community, I think, is young adults don't belong to any one system. So the systems need to develop relationships and partnerships from the very beginning with providers and service systems in many different realms and domains of a young adult's life. Discussion break. Thank you, Johanna. I see you have been answering. There's been a lot of conversation back and forth, how to, does the brainstorm address trauma, and the social context is very much a part of culture. Johanna, do you want to add anything else to what the chat's been about?
Yeah, well, I'm curious, for those of you that are listening, Heidi and Janelle have chimed in a little bit about what we may have missed in terms of either places where outcomes are challenging for this population or systems that we haven't addressed. We got a couple thumbs up for housing. If you guys have anything else to add to that list, that would be really valuable for future conversation planning. And then one of the things that we have been working on is a short list of reading material or TED Talks that have really spurred us to think differently in our work that we would be interested in sharing with you. And so if you have an experience like I did when reading Brainstorm from another piece of material, please go ahead and share that with us as well. And then I will roll us into our last polling question. Broad, sweeping policy change is the only way to assure better outcomes for young adults with behavioral health challenges. All right, I think they might be on to us in this one, Gwen. Everyone's reading carefully now. So as you log your results in, most of you think that this is a false statement, and Gwen and I agree. I think, Gwen, these are your words, that we would categorize policy change as involving baby steps, and that there are many areas that we could start our work in, and that each of us has a different role in this work and a different ability to start moving policy change forward. And oftentimes these are in small ways, which can be as powerful as broad, sweeping policy change. And we'll be talking about both together as a community. Through our work, we do know that policy change is critical. What we're talking about in the work that we're embarking on is more than just changing direct service delivery components. We need to change our system as well. And we've learned many things across the past decade or so, and still are doing a lot of learning every day. We all know, I think this is why we're here today, that we need to be able to promote a diverse set of developmentally appropriate and appealing services, and that we need to be ready to individualize to the young person's culture and community and needs. We've touched briefly on a couple of these things, this idea that this work needs to be more than just a children's system conversation or adult system conversation. Something we haven't mentioned, however we've heard is important in many of your communities, is that young adults are not the only individuals who are transitioning or experiencing that transition and change. Family units and parents and supportive adults are also experiencing this transition. And that continued supportive involvement of important adults in young people's lives to continue oftentimes needs some innovative policy change to be able to include those voices fully. Gwen, are there other things that we really want to pull out on this slide?
Again, this is something that I could talk to for a long time. I think one thing to look at is federal agencies working with young adults convened a panel of experts in 2005 that Davis and Koronagi drew these from. That's almost 12 years ago. And so I think it's critical for us to not be discouraged by this, but also realize that policy change is sometimes baby steps, and that if we broke these down, that there would be many changes that have happened in those 12 years, but it's still something that we need to keep on keeping on with and looking at. So in developmentally appropriate and appealing services in those 12 years, I think there's peer mentors, peer coaches, peer specialists, peer advisory councils have increased, youth-led services and supports. There is better engagement, better secondary school completion. We're now talking about career development, not just jobs. The pursuit of education and work in terms of building blocks around that, and comprehensive support. So it's not just mental health, but careers, relationships, parenting, certainly housing that you have talked about. A little bit about supporting the family role, and that has, I'm not a family member, but I hope those on the call will speak to this. I think it has gotten better, but the field certainly struggles with how to most appropriately support family members. There's been historic distrust between consumer groups, adult consumer groups, and children's consumer groups. So we need to continue as a field, and maybe it's something you'll be interested in with the learning community to look at that in depth. We do know that the data is pretty clear that young adults with involved family members have better outcomes transitioning to adulthood, but we also know that not all young adults have family members. So we as systems and supporters very much need to figure out how to help support and develop adult allies for young adults. I do think that we want to now think about all the transition and changes that we've talked about for systems and individuals, for those of us who are a part of this learning community. And I want to emphasize that in the end, this is all about individuals and changing lives. And hopefully as a transition learning community, we can remind ourselves of that periodically, that we can talk a lot about systems, but the bottom line is that we are talking about young people and changing their lives. That is very critical. So this is also a discussion slide. Johanna, I haven't been keeping up on the chat box. Do you want to fill us in?
Yeah, so everyone who's contributed thus far has given me another light bulb moment of how do we work that into future conversations. So please keep it up. I did put a question there for you guys to think about. You know, has there been a policy change in your community that has more successfully supported young adults of transition age? We'd love an example or an aha, or if you're working on something, go ahead and share that. I think one of my goals is to help make our work very tangible between us so that we can learn from each other's experiences.
And I would add that after this webinar, Johanna and I are going to be sending out your first set of homework questions. And they very much focus on some conversation starters for your communities, for around practice change and for around policy change in your services and support systems. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure as you look at these and begin to discuss with us that Johanna and I will both continue to have aha moments.
It's my favorite part about a learning community.
Yeah.
All right, great. So bringing up the fact that we have seen success in some communities, the peer workforce is definitely something of interest, I think, across today's participants. Okay. Keep using the chat box. I'm a firm believer in that is one of the best ways to have your voices heard on a voiceless webinar. And we'll open the lines up for or ask you to unmute your lines for conversation in just a minute. We're going to take a few minutes, Glenn, for polling. And this is one way that we're going to prioritize the conversations that bi-monthly moving forward. So in the frustrating way that we are your facilitators, we're giving you one vote. So please select the highest priority from the following list of potential topics for us to explore in the learning community. And so everything on here from those policy barriers, youth peer support, service models, financing, family engagement. And we're very aware that your one vote makes this a challenging choice. And we are lucky that we'll be able to address far more than one of these topics. So we want to start with your top. And I'm feeling seeing just a little bit more movement. if we miss something, if there's something you came here today to talk about that's not on that list, will you go ahead and type that into the chat box as well? I love it. Erin, does anyone come from a rural area? If so, what programs have you found that work well? Great. Thank you. Anybody else who's thinking along the lines of Erin, that you have sort of a specific infrastructure thing that you're thinking about, or a specific cultural question that you're thinking about, put it into the chat box for sure. Okay, and then we have a broad breadth here. I see a lot of interest in outreach and engagement, cross-systems work, specifically the children and adult systems, as well as our friends and partners in child welfare and education, are high in the list. So that's great. Perfect. Okay, great. Erin, you're getting some support out there, so that's great. We'll work on some conversations to support rural system involvement. Okay, let's do the second poll question. All right, so now we're tricky. We'd like you to rate your least topic, or the topic that's of least importance. So this is the opposite of the question we just asked you. People need more time to think about this one. One other thing that we can do as facilitators is we're taking a look at where you guys are all from, where your grantees are, what states or tribes or communities you're in, and we'll be able to pull on your expertise in specific areas because we know a little bit more about you from your registration information. Oh, this is such an interesting way to ask you to prioritize, you guys. Heidi, I can hear you saying those words in my voice. So every one of these things is important work, and probably we could all argue that they're vital to our work. So think about it in the context of how, of where you'd rather not spend online webinar time in the coming year. So it might be something you're already doing a lot of work in, or an area that you're able to get your support met in another way.
Or as you're prioritizing your time, you're not as interested in.
Yes. Okay, this was a really interesting polling question. Let's go on to the next. Or is that the last polling question? That would be so easy. All right, and we are done with polls. You guys made it through. Snaps all around. And so Glenn and I will be looking over those topics to help confirm the following learning community times. We are fully invested in inviting other voices to our call. And we can do that in a variety of ways. One of them will be to pull on the vast expertise of our hosting TA centers to bring in wiser voices than ours to facilitate discussion on some topics. And then we're also very interested in pulling in peer voices and hearing from some of you guys about what's working and what challenges you're working on in your community. So your quick responses today will help guide future presentation decisions. All right, so folks are typing away, which is just wonderful. So if we didn't ask you about a topic that's really important to you, please go ahead and type that into the chat now. If you'd like to talk about something else, if you have something that you want to make sure you share with everyone on the call in the future, go ahead and put that in the chat. And Glenn and I are going to talk a little bit more about what we're going to look like as a community moving forward.
Okay. Thank you, Johanna. So we've talked a lot at you today, and we hope not to do that in the future calls. There will be 4 more, But we want to tell you some of the things we recognize. We recognize that you all have busy day jobs. We recognize there are numerous learning activities and opportunities out there. We know that many of us appreciate time to multitask while being listening learners on webinars or office hours. But Johanna and Bree and Shannon and I want to invite you to look at the commitments that we've outlined here on the slide, because we don't want to be the people talking at you for the next 4 events. So we'll be giving you the dates of the Learning Community Series in the next slide. We'd like to ask that people participate in the discussion and the virtual interactions. I've been impressed with how you have been using the chat box and how you have responded to our true and false questions. We'll continue to think up more and better true and false questions. There are going to be homework questions for discussions and consideration, but these aren't meant to be onerous. As I said, there are 8 that will follow up from this, but it is going to be an opportunity to involve others of your peers or colleagues or partners. Hopefully you'll get them in enough time to be looking at the discussions and getting input from others that are involved in this work with you. Johanna has indicated that we're going to be looking for people who have a willingness to present. We've already identified we have over 30 experts in the field who are going to be a part of this. So that'll be exciting. And then certainly the sharing of resources, ideas, and opportunities as you have been doing today. Any comments on that, Johanna?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the folks that aren't here with us today. So, so we are interested in engaging we're interested in engaging with all of you. And if you're able to make this type of commitment to fully invest with us over the series of upcoming 4 learning events, we want you to register for the next session. You may be sitting there thinking, you know what, somebody else in my community should be a part of this, or I'm sitting in for someone else, or I'd like to do this with some of my team members together. We'd like you to spread the word to those in your communities if you think this would be a good fit for them, and that we'd like to convene as many of us as possible on our March call. And then we also know that we had people register for this webinar in an effort to tell us they were interested but weren't able to participate on today's date. So we'd really like to use the March 21st call to welcome, what will become our ongoing cohort together.
Thank you. That's a good reminder, Johanna. And I have people that I've talked to about this learning community, I've encouraged them to think broadly about those in, say, the learning labs for HT, or in partner communities for system of care, or even system partners that you think that this might be relevant to. It looks like people voted highly for engagement, and we're going to be, I would assume that that will be one of our topics. So yeah, Johanna and I were not at all sure how long this was going to take because we had so much we wanted to tell you. But you may find that you have some found time here, but we have time for a wrap-up discussion.
Yeah, and I think that we're definitely open for people who would like to be brave and speak on the phone if that works better for you than the virtual engagement. I believe that you self-muted, so you can unmute, or if you use the *1 key. and we're interested in something else you'd like to make sure that we address in the future learning community, or something that you're looking forward to discussing, or questions you have about the commitment as well.
So Gary has confirmed for us it's *1 to unmute yourself.
Hello? Hello, y'all?
Hello.
Y'all hear me? Hello, Gwen. This is Francisco from Lawrence.
Hi, Francisco.
Hello. You guys, thank you for this. You guys did a great job. And I think it's definitely important to, one thing that came up for me was to outline what one of the true-false questions was the youth culture.
Yeah.
And those dynamics, and how to curb our service to meet that need. I think it would be important for you guys to outline what that all means, turn it into a tangible definition or something definitive,
Okay.
you know. And
Great.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I remember Barbara from Florida also. Barbara, you wrote about being aware, I'm thinking of youth culture of social media and use of social media.
Yeah. And I think, because that'll help us a lot on because one thing that's unfortunate is that we understand the youth culture, but our outcome methods ain't that flexible, you know, so they can't bend and meet and kind of meet the youth culture halfway. Sometimes we have to kind of ask the youth to, you know, do away with their, you know, wariness of service providers.
Yeah.
And trust us, you know, even though sometimes they've met us that very moment. So I think that's a huge challenge that at least us over here have. Collecting outcomes, and then also being aware of the youth culture and how to kind of marry the two.
And I like, Francisco, that you identified that need for flexibility. That is not always where systems are always need for flexibility versus need for accountability, and how that all fits together.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Raymond from Montgomery County. First, it's a pleasure to be listening to folks talking about this stuff again after so many years, and you all have done a great job for the starting TA.
How are you, Raymond?
I'm good. So my question is really more about needing information, wanting information about how or if other folks have managed to successfully engage the adult side service system in rethinking how it deals with our transition age youth. Not think of them as chronologically 18, but to think of them as emerging adults rather than adults, and how do they train or retrain and make exceptions to the rules that they expect adults to operate under for our population.
And I think that was one of that interface between the adult and child system. But I think that reframing is very important. So several of you voted for that. We'll probably be looking closely at that. Anyone else?
Might be useful, especially if we're going to invite some of our adult serving side systems folks to have
Great.
that is geared for them and talks to them by other folks who have experience on the adult side.
And when I was talking about inviting some of your system partners into the learning community, I think the adult system would be great. Maybe we can use the raise your hand function, and if we have any one on the call, that they would identify themselves as being from the adult service delivery system, or you can type it in the chat box. Okay, so I think that's very indicative. This group is very representative of the child serving system.
Gwen, some folks in the chat box, lots of people interested in rural communities and the issues that we face there. And Gary's provided the registration link for another learning community that is specific to rural behavioral health. So some interest there. You guys can hear each other's voices on another call, as well as talking about generational differences. And I second that one if I get a vote in the polls.
So generational differences. Can you help me with that, Johanna, since I'm older than you?
That's our generational difference today, Gwen.
I almost said because I'm old, but I said I changed it to older than you.
Yeah, so I can't assume to know, Barbara, what inspired you to put that in the chat box, but in my work and Gwen and some of our work together in talking about the supportive ally role for young adults, sometimes we're working towards the same ends, but we use different words and we value different routes to get there because of the cultural content of the generation that we're from. And my team at Youth Move has spent quite a bit of time talking about how to navigate generational differences and how to find value in the perspective of those of us from other generations.
So we're hearing a lot, actually, about what I would call culture. Francisco Francisco brought up youth culture and what do we need about that. I think when Raymond brought up engaging the adult system, we know that the child serving system and adult serving systems have very, very different cultures. And then we're talking now about generational differences. So I see a theme coming up of a lot of this work being about negotiating culture and what culture means.
I think this is great, Gwen, and folks have provided a lot of sort of food for thought as we plan future topics. We will, we'll have the ability to continue to use all of the technology things we use today to make sessions interactive. We will also look at the number of registered participants for our March event and support this verbal dialogue as much as we can. And if we're all sort of in it together and figure out how to use mute, we can probably be pretty effective in having this type of discussion time. There are other technologies available to us, and we'll follow your lead in terms of how interested you are in receiving additional materials on the side and responding to some homework questions that we send you. And we'll sort of grow this together, but we'll convene like this on the phone call and web bi-monthly for the next 4 months. And if you have any specific thoughts about what helps you as a learner engage virtually, I am all ears, either now via the chat box or in future. Gwen and I have our contact information shared on the screen. And we'll be as responsive as we can to making this a worthwhile opportunity for you guys to participate in.
So the homework questions that we already got last time?
Oh.
Yes.
Well, they're a follow-up to this one, and then once we determine they're the follow-up to this call. Johanna and I weren't sure if they'd gone out, so thank you for confirming that they did go out. And once we determine what the March call was, there might be some discussion questions that come out early March, prior to the March call.
Okay, so we should be working on these January questions or not?
We'd love you to work on these January questions.
And do we do anything specific with them or just hold on to them until the March call?
They're for your information and thinking about policy and practice change. So yes, hold on to them as you discuss them in your communities, and we will incorporate some time to talk about them at the beginning of the call. Would that be your thought, Johanna?
Yeah, exactly. And Gwen, I think you were very mindful of the fact that oftentimes those of us on their call are sort of one representative of our team. Mm-hmm. And so those questions are really to help you get the input of any others you need to bring to this learning. So yes, bringing them as the kickoff to the March call would be perfect.
And we saw at the beginning that many of you consider yourself, and it's really exciting, in that intermediate phase of the implementation. And these are sort of questions I find helpful in terms of if we really think we're doing a good job moving along, can these push us further?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I do see that there was a request to send the questions out again. I think we can do that, or we will do that. And Johanna, we may have come to the end of discussion time.
Excellent. Awesome. So thank you guys, everyone, for your robust participation in all of the ways we asked you to participate and totally staying with us today. Again, our contact information is on the screen. The PowerPoint is available for download, and we will look forward to convening with hopefully all of you in March, and we will be in touch with a follow-up about some homework discussion questions. And I'd just like to say thanks to everybody, and thank you, Gwen, for co-hosting today.
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you to everyone out there.